What's up, everyone? This is Noa Dalzell, and I'm very excited to announce that we are starting a new channel here at CLNS called WNBA Today, which will be the home of all of our WNBA coverage. I've been covering the WNBA for 2 seasons now. It has been such a joy, and I've been following and loving the league for a lot longer than that. So I know many of you know my coverage from the Celtics side, whether that's my podcast, You Got Boston podcast, whether that is the Garden Report, which I look forward to being a part of in the coming year as well, or whether that's my writing for SB Nation or Celtics blog. Now we have a official channel where we can put together all of our videos and all of my words on the WNBA. So I know some of you have been asking for this. Some of you have come to my podcast and asked a lot of WNBA related questions. So this channel is for you. So make sure to subscribe, leave any comments, questions, thoughts you have on this whole new endeavor. I'm going to be having regular content come out throughout the playoffs. I know it's a little bit late in the game. We're going to be active throughout the playoffs, and then also putting out off-season coverage around Unrivaled, around transactions, all of that, and we'll be in full speed by the time next season starts. So I'm personally super excited about this. I love podcasting. I love talking, and I love the WNBA, so this is going to be a great confluence of all the things that I've enjoyed for a long time now. This first episode is going to be centered around my voting ballot because I'm a WNBA Media voter. I'm one of 72 media members that had the chance to cast their own selections for MVP, Defensive Player of the Year, Rookie of the Year, the All WNBA team, Coach of the Year, the All Defense team, Defensive Player of the Year. The list goes on. It's a lot of different selections. And I went through that process last week. I cast my ballot on Friday. Literally at the buzzer, I was going back and forth until the final minute. It was my first time casting a ballot because I was not a media voter last year. I don't have a media ballot for the NBA side. So it was a huge honor. It was a huge privilege. It was one I did not take lightly. And I also spent a ton of time not just rewatching games, watching film, but also diving into statistics, talking to various people around the league who are on the scouting side, who kind of pick people's brains on that department. So it was super cool. It was a super cool process. I had a series of articles come out on sbnation.com, which you can check out. But I also wanted to put together this video series that helps kind of explain some of those selections. And for some of you, I know some of you are 100% into the WNBA and probably have so many opinions around my votes, and I'm more than happy to hear them. And many of them I've already heard because people have been sharing their feedback and their thoughts on my selections. And I know many of you are, if you're coming from my Celtics coverage, you might be a little bit more new to the WNBA. And I really want this channel to welcome those people as well. So we're going to cover the league here. We're going to have analysis after playoff series, previewing upcoming playoff series, discussing kind of the latest storylines around the league. A lot of the times it'll be shorter reaction videos, so it might not even be an entire podcast episode. But if you subscribe to this channel, you'll get notification for like a 7-minute video about a transaction or something like that. So I'm super excited for all this, as I've mentioned. And again, I really want this to serve all of you, all of the listeners that have been asking for more WNBA coverage. And so if you have suggestions or ways that you want to see this done, my inbox is always open and I'm always happy to hear your feedback. So that being said, I will share a little bit about myself before I jump into this episode, just because for those of you that maybe are new to myself or my coverage, I grew up right outside of Boston, played basketball my whole life, played basketball in high school, club at Northeastern, not at a level where I ever compare myself to any of the players, but certainly at a level that made me want to continue to be around basketball for as long as I possibly could be. And that's kind of what I've managed to do with this career. I've been covering the NBA for the last 2 seasons, the WNBA for the last 2 seasons. I'm based in Boston, so on the NBA side, I exclusively cover the Celtics, and on the WNBA side, I cover the league at large. And obviously for now, there is no team in Boston. Fingers crossed a team comes to Boston in the coming years. I know that is a whole other discussion topic that we can make another episode about. So that's a little bit about me. I absolutely love basketball. That is probably my defining quality. And I love to write and I love to talk. So when it all clicked for me that this was the career that I wanted to be in, it was like, how did I not realize this earlier? Because it kind of is the intersection of everything that brings me joy. So with that being said, this is a super exciting time in the WNBA as the first rounds of all the playoff series are wrapping up and we're heading into the semifinals. So we're about to have 4 teams left that are competing with a trip to the WNBA finals on the line. And for the first time ever, it'll be a 7-game WNBA finals, which is super exciting. And I think everybody wants that, especially considering how great the WNBA finals were last year. So with all that being said, hopefully that's a little bit of a helpful introduction about me and my background and kind of what drives me to cover this league. And I will jump right into my voting philosophy. So, as I mentioned, this was the first time that I've ever had the opportunity to cast a media ballot for the NBA or the WNBA. I was also a voter for Unrivaled, which is the off-season 3-on-3 basketball league that many WNBA players chose to participate in this past winter. That's a whole other topic that we'll cover in a different episode, but Unrivaled was absolutely awesome. I love 3-on-3, and I was able to make a trip down there and see it for myself right outside of Miami. And so I had a ballot for that, and that was my first time with the experience of being like, okay, you love the game, you have a lot of opinions, a lot of thoughts, but now you have to kind of put those biases aside. You have to put aside your personal preference for players, and you have to be as objective as possible because this matters, right? 72 voters, like you could be the difference between somebody getting an accolade and not getting an accolade. So for me, it's just so important that not only is my vote informed, but that it's as informed as it possibly can be, and that also it's consistent. So that's one of the toughest things. You'll see voters share like their philosophies. You don't want to say, okay, for some players, I do care about X, Y, Z, but for another player, I don't. And obviously you can make exceptions, but then you want to like be very cognizant of those exceptions. So I thought this was going to be a lot of fun. And honestly, it was not a lot of fun because I felt like it was just a lot of stress to make sure I do it right. And I'm not a perfectionist in general. Like when I write, I just kind of write from the heart and I put it out there. And sometimes I reread stories that I published and I'm like, okay, this could have been a lot better. But I think I just like putting out what feels good the first time around. With the ballots, I went back and I revised them about a million times until they were as close to the final product as possible. So I'll start with the award that I think generates the most buzz, and that's the MVP award. And I voted for A'ja Wilson, Las Vegas Aces center, A'ja Wilson, as my number one selection for that. This was the only award that we actually got to put a whole ballot. So it wasn't just one vote. You actually put 5 names and you ranked them in order. So I had A'ja Wilson number 1, Napheesa Collier of the Minnesota Lynx for number 2, Alyssa Thomas of the Phoenix Mercury number 3, Alicia Gray of the Atlanta Dream for number 4, and then I had Kelsey Mitchell of the Indiana Fever for my 5th selection. And really, it ended up coming down to A'ja Wilson and Napheesa Collier, even though Alyssa Thomas is kind of a perennial MVP candidate at this point. And she broke so many records, and she was this triple-double machine, and honestly elevated Phoenix to a top 4 seed. I don't want to say single-handedly because there's a lot of players that had great seasons, but she was really the hub on both ends. So she was in consideration for me too, but I ended up doing A'ja as my number 1 selection. And I'll tell you, I'll rattle off just like some of my reasoning for that. And I know that some people are going to disagree. And I've honestly, like, I love Napheesa Collier's game. Probably stylistically, I prefer her game. And I also prefer somebody getting an MVP award for the first time. So I try not to root for outcomes, but I definitely found myself at some points throughout the season being like, oh, I'm really excited to see Napheesa get MVP and I'm excited to vote for her. So I wanted to vote for her at a portion. And obviously, when it comes down to being a voter, you put anything you wanted aside. And so and I love A'ja Wilson too, and I love her game, and I've really, really enjoyed watching her kind of dominate this era of basketball. So it's not like I don't like one of the players, but I think I fall into the human nature of like, okay, this is going to be a first time selection for somebody. Like she's going to get her award for the first time. A'ja already has 3. Like, does she really need one more? Like that's kind of how my brain was going, and I was like, hold up, like you can't think about it like that. So I put that aside and I looked into the numbers, and I think the most astounding single statistic that I came across when I put my ballot together, and this included like all the research that I did, was that the Las Vegas Aces were 26.9 points better, 26.9 points when A'ja Wilson was on the floor than when she was off of it. So when A'ja Wilson's on the floor, the Aces are outscoring opponents by 15.2 points per game. So like they're beating opponents handily, right? When she's on the bench, they're losing by 11.7 points per game. Like that is just a ridiculous swing. So not only is it the biggest of the MVP candidates, but it's actually like it was the most jarring stat that I came across by far. There's also other statistics that I looked at, like win shares, which is like what portion, how many wins is a player responsible for according to various advanced analytics. She has the highest win shares, 9.5 of any player in the league. She has the highest offensive win shares, 6.2, the highest defensive win shares, 3.3. So she just when you look at the advanced numbers, I mean, she led the league in scoring and in rebounds and in blocks. So the raw numbers are on her side. And then as far as her impact on the team, even though it was just massive. And Napheesa also had a massive impact on the Minnesota Lynx. And so I didn't feel like, okay, just because the Aces are really bad when Asia sits, that's not single-handedly going to be the reason that I pick Napheesa as my second pick and Asia as my primary pick. So it wasn't just that. It was a couple different things. It was the fact that Napheesa did end up missing time. And I know a lot of people question, should that be a part of your MVP vote? So Napheesa Collier sprained her ankle. It was a brutal moment. It was in a blowout game that I'm sure she and Cheryl Reeve and everybody else wishes she was on the bench at that point. And the good news is she came back and looked great, and she's fully healthy, in the playoffs, and that's the most important thing. But because the MVP race is there's such a small margin of error, margin of anything, her ending up only playing 33 games, that's missing. She missed a quarter of the season. And so that didn't disqualify her. And I saw some people say, hey, why does that disqualify her? But then you had other players on your ballot who made all WNBA who missed a quarter of the season. It wasn't disqualifying, but it did ultimately come into play when I'm already the margins are razor thin, right? So I'm already thinking about the fact that A'ja Wilson has elevated a cast around her that has really, really struggled without her. So that by definition, that is what it means to be valuable, right? It's to elevate somebody, a team from one place to another. They were not good without her. And then with her, they were really good, right? And so that's one thing that I kind of realized. And it ended up also coming into play the reality that while Napheesa was sitting, A'ja puts together the stretch of basketball that was the most dominant stretch of basketball that any player played the season. And the Lynx, did well while Collier was sidelined, which is credit to them, credit to Jessica Shepard, who stepped up beautifully in her absence. But at the same time, A'ja Wilson is putting up these ridiculous numbers, and the Aces don't lose the rest of the year. So literally, they do not lose the entire time. And so I didn't only look at that stretch because this is a season-long award. This is not just an award for the last 16 games of the season. But it certainly helped that while Collier is not on not active, A'ja Wilson is putting together these pretty incredible numbers. So it was pretty close to me, honestly. And I think the thing that I had to fight back was any desire that I had to see a narrative unfold, to see a player that I've long really loved. I think Napheesa Collier is my top 5 favorite basketball player as far as just style, and her footwork is just incredible, and just the way that she's so smooth, and just I really love watching her play. And so it's I would love to be a part of her winning this award, but that I had to put on the side. And when I started just looking at the numbers and thinking situationally, one player was much more available than the other. Again, not her fault, but is the reality of the season. And then the fact that the Aces ended up finishing with the second seed, it's if A'ja Wilson had this monster individual season and then the Aces finished with the 6th seed, I don't think that that would not have made her my front runner MVP candidate. It would have been a spectacular season. She would have gotten a lot of accolades for it. She would have been in my top 5, but she would not have been my pick for this award. And so I think I ended up just kind of having to think through all of that, and that's what made me end up going with her as my number 1. And Napheesa was number 2, Alyssa Thomas 3, and those were really the 3 players that I heavily considered for MVP. So that was a really hard vote. Some of the votes were a lot easier, and it was such a nice feeling to have full confidence in a selection. One of the selections that I had absolute confidence in was Veronica Burton of the Golden State Valkyries, who has already been awarded the Most Improved Player award, and I think she earned 68 of 72 votes. So she earned an overwhelming majority of media votes for that award. Not only was she the most improved player this year, I think she was the most improved player that we have seen in the WNBA for a very long time. She went from somebody who, this has been well chronicled at this point, but she was waived by the Dallas Wings last summer, ends up signing with the Connecticut Sun, who I was sort of a beat writer for last year. So I was around a lot in Connecticut and covered her. And actually, I think I played against her in high school because she's from the town over for me. I'm pretty sure, but I would remember her. I don't think she would remember me. I was not a noteworthy player. But I've long followed her career because she's from the area. And she also had a great college career, went to the WNBA. And then once you make it to the WNBA, it's just so hard to stay in the league. It's just a league that has way fewer opportunities than the NBA does, way fewer roster spots. There's only 12 players to a roster. There's only 13 teams in the league right now. And that's, this year there were less teams than previous years because the league is currently undergoing expansion, but she ends up signing with Connecticut. She plays with Connecticut for a couple of months to close out the year. And I think she shows flashes of like, okay, this is a WNBA player. She guards Caitlin Clark in the playoffs. She comes off the bench and backs up Dejanay Carrington, and it's like she's providing a boost, you know? But at the end of the day, when Connecticut had to, secure 6 players from being selected in expansion, there's an expansion draft because the Golden State Valkyries are the newest team in the league. And so every team can say, okay, these 6 players you cannot draft. And they had a choice of whether Veronica Burton was going to be one of those players. And they opted to leave her unprotected. And well, the Golden State Valkyries ended up selecting Veronica Burton. And I interviewed her in the summer. And one of the things that she said was, people think we're not going to be good. We're not in the summer, I should say, in the winter, right before the season started. But she said, people think we're not going to be good, and we're going to prove them wrong. And everybody here has a chip on their shoulder. And I talked to Natalie Nakase, the head coach of the Golden State Valkyries, who is also my pick for coach of the year, which I'll talk more about. But she said, we picked players, not just that we believe in basketball wise, but players that also have this work ethic, this mindset that they are going to be proven winners, basically. And so Veronica Burton fits that mold. And I was a huge fan of hers in Connecticut. I thought that she provided a huge boost for that team. Great midseason pickup. Anytime you sign a player that was just waived, that was literally sitting at home on the couch, like that is, if you can get any value out of that, that's great front office move. But I don't think anybody would have been able to foresee that Veronica Burton would become not just a starting point guard on a playoff team, but the most important player on a playoff team, and somebody who I actually heavily considered for all WNBA. And she just missed out on all WNBA. I think she would have been on my third team, honestly, if I had an additional 5 players. She's one of the best guard defenders in the league, like a great point of attack defender, a great defender on a Valkyries team that has been a top 5 defense for most of the season. And offensively, she is one of the league's elite playmakers now. And that's something that I think you saw flashes of. But she averages 6 assists per game this season, 12 points per game. She becomes a consistent 3-point threat. So she ends up finishing the season with like a 56.7% true shooting percentage. So she actually improved her efficiency, which is so unusual to go from like somebody who has a small offensive load to now the ball's in her hand all the time. She's at the top of the scouting report, and she has somehow become more efficient. And at the same time, she's also one of the anchors defensively. So she has just had a spectacular season. She has one of the league's highest assist to turnover ratios. She has become a really reliable 3-point shooter. And you can't talk about the Valkyries' inaugural season without immediately talking about her. So at the beginning, first half of the year, Kayla Thornton was the leading scorer. She was named All-Star for the first time in her career. She would have been a great candidate for this award, but she ends up hurting her knee. We don't know exactly what it was, but has season-ending knee surgery right after the All-Star break. So at that point, it's Veronica Burton who kind of takes over. And she had some spectacular moments throughout this. She became the first player ever to tally 10 assists and 0 turnovers 3 times in a single season. And she also had some stat lines that she put together that have never been achieved by a WNBA player. So one of them was 25 points, 3 assists, 4 blocks, and 5 rebounds. And then she also tied the WNBA record for most assists in a single game without a turnover, which was 14. So like she had these moments, and these were all after the All-Star break. Like she had these moments that were just like, okay, this is an elite player, and the Valkyries picked wisely, and they scouted wisely when they selected her, and she improved drastically. So I looked at other candidates. Azurá Stevens from the Los Angeles Sparks had a great season. She was a lot better than she was last year, but she's had other really strong seasons in the WNBA where she's averaged double-digit points and had like similar production to what she had this year. So when I was looking at most improved, I didn't want to just look at from last year to this year. I wanted to look at like the last couple seasons. And if you just had a down year last year, that doesn't necessarily put you in most improved player discussions. So yeah, it was super cool. It was super cool to see her growth. And I think she was one of the reasons why the Sparks were kind of hovering in and around the playoff race all season long. But it really wasn't close to me. And I considered a number of players. I mean, Angel Reese got a lot better. She was under my consideration. She improved, I thought, a lot offensively. She improved as a defender as well. So she went from an all-star to an all-star that was better, but that's not, it wasn't just like a substantial jump. To me, that like the nature of this award is going from like one level of production to a whole other level. And yes, a lot of times it's affiliated with an increase in minutes, but that's just the nature of it. So like Dejanay Carrington went from averaging 17 minutes to 29 minutes the year that she won it. Satu Sabali also was averaging like 21 minutes to 33 minutes. So like, yeah, it comes with an increased opportunity, but a lot of times players get more opportunities and that doesn't lead to higher production. And so this was not one of those times. And she has already been rewarded accordingly by winning this vote. Rookie of the Year was another easy one. So shout out to Paige Bueckers, or not easy, but I didn't really consider it all too much. She had a spectacular rookie season for the Dallas Wings. She ended up averaging 19.1 points on 47.4% shooting. And the biggest knock on her Rookie of the Year campaign is that she was on a bad team. And the Dallas Wings were a bad team. They were the worst team in the league for most of the year. They finished with the worst record in the WNBA. And her opponent for this race was Sonia Citron of the Washington Mystics, who was the number 3 overall pick, who had 2 edges over Paige. She was more efficient and she was on a better team. And overall, I actually value winning a lot across my ballot. So it was my guiding force when I formed my all WNBA team, when I formed my all defense team, MVP. Like, I think winning is the point of basketball, and therefore I work backwards from there. And that's somewhere where like I might completely digress from other voters or other fans. And it's a philosophy that I'm willing to be challenged on. So, I know some people have said, I think your all defense ballot should have been just your individual players that you've wanted. I ended up the best individual players. And I ended up not doing that because I wanted to go off of team defense. So you could challenge me there. But ultimately, when it comes to rookies are supposed to be on bad teams. Yes, you're supposed to elevate the team as much as you can. And it would have been great if Paige had been able to get more wins for the Dallas Wings. But I really didn't think that. I think that she kind of hit her load. She had the highest scored game of the season, a 44-point outing against the Sparks. She wasn't inefficient, and she was a better playmaker. She just did a lot on all fronts, and she had the highest load as well. So I wrote about that more extensively. But she was the number 1 overall pick. She was fresh off a national title, and she met expectations. And yes, Sonia Citron, who ended up shooting 44.5% from 3 on the year, like just ridiculous. She was the best 3-point shooter of all WNBA guards. Like, she ended up being in this conversation. But it was just hard for me to select her over Paige, considering the load that Paige ended up shouldering. And had the Mystics like made the playoffs and Sonia really goes off the last 10 games, I think it could have been neck and neck. But the reality is that when they traded Brittany Sykes to the Seattle Storm, they took a dive and they ended up going on a massive losing streak. And so it was hard to be like, okay, well, Sonia gets credit for all the winning, and that's enough to put her as Rookie of the Year. When as soon as you traded the team's leading scorer, they kind of struggled to win, just like the Dallas Wings did, right? Because that's what happens when you have a team that's mostly led by rookies, right? And these are both rebuilding teams that were not supposed to be so awesome on the record front. So I think they overachieved early on, and Sonia was certainly a big part of it. So it was Kiki, and I think that she deserves a shout out for her stellar rookie season as well. But this was a pretty easy one as well. Another award that wasn't like overly challenging for me, but I think will be pretty close around the league, was Coach of the Year. And again, I always struggle with evaluating coaching because I think that ultimately there are so many lenses through which you could look at coaching. We almost have like our eyes covered, I think, as media members, because we're not in the back room, we're not in the film sessions, we don't, hear every single thing the coach is telling the players. Also, we don't know like who has better staffs. Like, some people might have better staff than other people. So it's something that, like, as when I cover the Celtics and I spend a lot of time around Joe Mazzulla, like, I have my opinions and I have some thoughts, but it's not like I'm going to sit here and say like I have all my critiques of Joe based on my spot in press row. So all that being said, Natalie Nakase, who is a first-year coach, who has been an assistant for the Las Vegas Aces. She's been an assistant for the Los Angeles Clippers. She has a beautiful resume of basketball experience. And she was a first-time head coach for the Golden State Valkyries, and right away kind of proved to be a great selection. She actually shadowed the Celtics. So I first saw her at a Celtics practice, and that's what helped form my first feature on her, which you can check out at SB Nation as well. But Natalie basically takes a team full of bench players and international players and propels them to the playoffs. And yes, there were other really kind of remarkable coaching seasons. Carlos Mesco helped lead the dream from a fringe playoff team to a top 3 seed. Like that's, and also just watching them, like that team looked transformed. And yes, you give credit to Brianna Jones, who's been a big part of that, and it's been helpful to have Brittany Griner as well for depth, and things have kind of come together. They've been healthier this year than they have been in years prior. But it was just, I was not going to be able to select somebody over Natalie, considering just how much that team overachieved. And not just that, but they played so hard. They played so together. Like you could just feel on every single game that they're maximizing their talent. And individual players have and will get credit for this performance. Kayla Thornton gets named an all-star, after years in the WNBA. Veronica Burton's, named most improved player. So like, yeah, you had to have those players perform individually well at the end of the day. Like the coach is not going to be able to get the ball in the basket. But Angel Reese has this, interview, which makes all these headlines, where she basically is just unsatisfied with how the Chicago Sky have been performing. And one of the things she points to is the Valkyries and like how hard they play on every single night. And that's something I don't talk to people around the league. Like everybody knows that when you go up against Golden State, it is going to be a massive challenge, regardless of whether they're shorthanded, regardless of whether they have, training camp hardship contract players or players that have very little experience in the league or have never started games. Now they're starting games, now they're primary scoring options. Like it was all going to make it was always going to be a fight. And so I give Natalie the credit for that. Just seeing the way she's instilled confidence in her players. I think one of the things that you can really see is that when you are asking players about their coaches, like very rarely do players talk ill of their coaches, but there is a certain way, like Veronica Burton would gush about Natalie Nakase and the confidence she instilled in her and the belief that they all have in one another, there's just subjectively, I can tell the difference. And it's very clear how bought in this team is. And everybody had them as one of the worst teams in the league. I think ESPN had them last. Athletic had them as one of their last teams. Like if you look at all the preseason power rankings, the Valkyries were expected to be the worst, and they were right around the 6th to 8th seed for most of the second half of the season. And so that just kind of goes to show you that this was a consistent team that was always in games, that was an elite defense, that was always competitive, that always kind of maximized what they had. And that's not going to be enough for a title in year one. But I do give Natalie credit for the culture that she instilled, and then also the schemes she ran, the amount of threes they were able to get up, the amount of good looks they were able to get up, despite on having like primary scoring options, like in a traditional way that you'd be used to. So shout out to her. We'll see if she gets the award. But she was my vote, and honestly, not a vote that I overthought too much. Was on the easier side when it came to these selections. The last award that I'll go over in this video today, and I'll probably make more videos discussing this throughout the playoffs and as things come up. But that was my Defensive Player of the Year. This was the award that I probably struggled with the most because defense is just so hard to evaluate, and it's so hard to compare somebody like Gabby Williams, who is probably the league's most elite perimeter defender, and honestly one of the most like stifling perimeter defenders that I've seen in basketball. Led the league in steals, was just like so phenomenal on that end, navigating screens, deflecting passes, just being a menace. How do you compare her to A'ja Wilson, who is leading the league in blocks and who is a rim protector and who has very different responsibilities? And how do you compare Veronica Burton, who is a great point of attack defender, to Brianna Stewart, right? Like I struggle with that. And then I also struggle with the fact that statistics are very limited. You can look at individual defensive rating, but a lot of that just has to do with what players you play with. And you can look at blocks and steals, but blocks and steals are really not everything. I'll say for myself, I'm really good at blocking shots. Whenever I play basketball, I always get a few blocks in. And I'm not a great defender because a lot of times, like when I block shots, it's because I'm out of position and now it's like a chase down or whatever, right? So if I was really playing good defense, like the player wouldn't have even caught the ball on the post where they caught it, right? So I don't want to overreact to any stats. And I think on the offensive side, things like true shooting and assist to turnover ratio and field goal percentage and all that like does capture a player's impact better. So I struggle with this award. The way that I approach defense and defensive accolades is by how good your team defense is. And then you're playing a role within that ecosystem. And that role sometimes is really visible to fans. Sometimes that role is like, okay, I'm seeing A'ja Wilson block shots, or I'm seeing somebody, really lock down their opposing player, whoever their matchup is. And these other players that play a really critical role sometimes get overlooked in that system. And so when you hear a head coach like Cheryl Reeves say, Alanna Smith should be the Defensive Player of the Year, as a media member and as a fan of the sport, I pause and I think to myself, okay, have I been underrating her impact on the Minnesota Lynx' defensive end? So the Lynx finished the season with the best defensive rating in the WNBA, and I'm always going to start there when I'm evaluating defense. So if they have the best defensive rating in the WNBA and that matches the eye test for having watched them play all season long, then they should get a good crack at the Defensive Player of the Year. That's how I view it. And I completely understand. I got a lot of backlash to this because a lot of people have said, A'ja Wilson is the most individually dominant defender. And I think she might be. And, there's different, we could talk about that all day, but that's not how I view this award. It's just my philosophy on it. It's how I've always thought about it on the NBA side. And I think you've seen, players get rewarded because now they have their team has the best defense and they play the most important role within that system, because defense is such a team thing. You cannot just guard one-on-one in this league, and you can't score one-on-one. And so that's the challenge. And so I don't feel perfect about it. Maybe I'll reflect in a year or two and change my philosophy and how I evaluate defense. And if I'm lucky to continue to be able to vote on these awards, maybe I'll eventually kind of change the way I look at it. But that's the way I approached it in year one. And it was not for a lack of thought. It was simply just thinking about what defense really is and how do you evaluate it and how do you reward it. And the Minnesota Lynx were the most dominant defense this season. And they have two players that are the most responsible for that. And that's their starting center, Alanna Smith, and that's Napheesa Collier, who was the Defensive Player of the Year last year. And so a part of me wanted to give it to Napheesa because she oftentimes takes those really difficult matchups. She had the better individual defensive rating. And she obviously was Defensive Player of the Year last season. So she has already been kind of perceived as that elite defender. But she's talking about Alanna Smith as Defensive Player of the Year. She'll Reeves. And it just seems clear that the Minnesota Lynx are kind of starting to put this campaign together that she is their defensive anchor. And maybe that was strategic because they thought Napheesa was going to win MVP, so they wanted everybody to have something. Maybe that's what it is. That's not going to be the reason why I cast a vote, but it is going to be a reason why I watch more carefully. And the more I watched this Minnesota team and I went back and I rewatched games, the more I realized that I myself, and I think the public eye and even probably Lynx fans, have underrated the role that she plays, not just with her switchability and with the way that she gets out on the perimeter, which is kind of uncanny for a player that also has her rim protection and kind of that side of things. But also just the help defense that she plays. She's just this cog, and you saw when Napheesa went out, she was able to kind of anchor that defense continuously. So I think both players would have been great selections for Defensive Player of the Year. I think A'ja Wilson would be a great selection for Defensive Player of the Year. And I think Gabby Williams, if you're ever going to give it to a perimeter player, she made a great case this year. And probably the thing that held me back from seriously considering her is that the Storm just finished a little bit behind on the defensive end, as far as like if they were like the best defense, if they had the best defensive rating in the WNBA, then I think Gabby Williams would have been a really good pick. So I ended up going with Alanna Smith. I know that a lot of people would have wanted to see that award go to Napheesa Collier or A'ja Wilson, two very individually dominant defenders who have won that award in years past. There's one stat that I love that I came across that Nakase Duncan, who is one of my favorite WNBA analysts, put out, and this was after I had already selected Alanna, and you can kind of see this. This captures what I've been seeing, that only 3 WNBA players contested at least 100 shots at the rim throughout the season, while holding opponents to under 50% on those shots. And Alanna Smith contested 137 shots at the rim. She held opponents to 46% shooting. And that was the best of the 3. A'ja Wilson was 170 shots. She held opponents to 47.1% shooting. And Azzi McBegor from the Seattle Storm defended 169 shots and held opponents to 47.9% shooting. So that's just another category that kind of captures her defensive impact around the rim. But at the end of the day, her team also rallied behind her as well, which helped at least elevate her in my eyes to let me watch her really carefully. Because when you watch a basketball game, you can watch offense, you can watch defense, you can watch the player with the ball in their hand, you can watch what's the sidelines. And I oftentimes rewatch games multiple times because I want to make sure that I am seeing everything. So when I watch a Minnesota Lynx game, I'm usually watching the ball, I'm watching the offense, I'm watching specific players, I'm watching everything, but I can't watch it all at once super, super well. And maybe some people are able to, maybe they're gifted and they can kind of process it all perfectly at once. But I went back and I rewatched many Minnesota Lynx games with the intent of watching Alanna Smith on defense. And that is what solidified my vote for her ultimately. So it's not a perfect science. I think that you could make strong cases for a number of players, but this was probably the hardest vote for me to cast because of the limit of analytics and because of the fact that I think just you can view defense in so many different ways. But she was the anchor really for this team all season long, and this was a awesome defensive team, and I thought they deserved to be rewarded with a Defensive Player of the Year. So a lot of controversy around all these selections, I'm sure. And I'm sure if we had fans vote, it would be even more muddled. And again, so many philosophies to look at, but it was an honor to have an awards vote, to be able to cast my vote for all these awards, as well as all defense and all WNBA, which I'll probably save for another episode since there's been a lot here. I'll just give a quick shout out to Napheesa, who I voted for sixth player of the year. Napheesa is probably in a 2-player race with Naz Hillman of the Atlanta Dream. And I think just she has been the essence of a good 6th player of the year, because she's coming off the bench. She can go for 20 at any given moment. She's a spark plug. If Courtney Williams doesn't have it, then Napheesa can kind of close out games and play the Courtney Williams role. She's improved with her shot selection. She's improved defensively. So to me, she was actually she was a really strong candidate for this award. And also, again, anytime you can reward one of the top seeds with a award selection, I think that's a good thing. But that's not why I picked her. So she was my last kind of single player vote. So all that being said, it was a lot of fun to be able to get the chance to vote. It was a lot of stress to be able to get the chance to vote. I enjoyed writing articles explaining and detailing my process further, which you can check out at sbnation.com. And at the same time, I also wanted to be able to kind of talk about these award selections as well. So hopefully this is helpful for those of you that have been following my coverage and watching my podcast. It's probably not much of a change. I'm sitting in the same room that I always sit in when I record my podcast, but obviously covering a different topic right now. For those of you that have read my WNBA writing but haven't actually heard me speak, this is what I sound like and what I look like. So welcome to the audio video world of my WNBA coverage. So we're going to have a lot more coming out here at CLNS in the coming days, in the coming weeks. So excited for the rest of this postseason. I think it's going to be an incredible one. I want to see every series go as long as possible. I want to see a 7-game WNBA finals. Last year's finals spoiled me. It was just such an awesome experience to be there and to watch so many clutch shots and just overtime in game 5. I mean, so crazy to think about that even happened. So hope you enjoyed. Subscribe, like, leave a comment, leave a question, leave criticism, message me if you have thoughts on how you want to see this show progress in the coming days. Share with your friends, and we'll be back with more content soon.